Hey everybody, this is Lassi coming back to you with another video from what somebody called a garden shed in the comments in the previous video. Thank you for lifting my spirits with that. Today I wanted to talk about something very different. So I want to bring up the topic of AI and consciousness and explore the topic of, can AI become conscious at some point in a way that humans experience it? And we'll talk about, is it already actually happening? We just don't know it. And I'll lay out some steps and systems and changes that we would have to make that I personally think would be crucial for that to happen. And we'll finish off with some pondering about what are the implications of it. Can we actually know if something is conscious or not? And my predictions. And just like that previous video, I can already say off the bat that this is going to be a longer one where I explore the topic from a variety of perspectives, and I'll talk about it in a really detailed way. So if you're looking for just like a quick summary 5 minute, this is probably the wrong place to be. But if you're truly interested in actually exploring what AI is doing and what is consciousness, then I think you will hopefully get some interesting ideas out of this video. The second thing I want to mention right off the bat is that with AI, I mean specifically LLMs, or these foundational models that we interact with on a daily basis. Because I think they are the most complex and most advanced AIs, and that's what I will mean with AI during this whole talk. Reason why I want to bring this up is actually two things. One is a kind of a casual observation that a lot of people that I talk to, when they are interacting with ChatGPT or Claude, and they describe their interactions, they are clearly already now attributing a sense of consciousness to the AI that they're speaking with. But the other reason is that we are heading towards a direction where a conscious AI is more and more likely. And, we need to be prepared for that thing. I think the first question you need to ask when you talk about AI and consciousness is to discuss if it's even possible for a machine to become conscious in the same way that humans do. And the short answer in my mind is that why not? I don't think there is any sort of reason why a biological machine, which is the human brain or other living organism, would have the monopoly for conscious experience. We used to think that true integrative and sort of intuitive level of intelligence would only be assigned to humans. But now, with these modern AIs, we've already shown that we can actually create a super intelligence that matches or exceeds the intelligence of regular humans. I don't see why consciousness would be somehow magical in that sense. I think we can create something that will behave and experience things just the way that humans do. The problem why it's difficult to do is that we don't fully understand what consciousness is and why it arises. Not knowing is not the same as something being impossible or something not being achievable. It just means that we are actually very likely not going to recognize the moment when we've created conscious AIs. Okay, but so let's start talking about what are the things that make something conscious. The first thing we can think of is that there are different levels or scopes to consciousness. So if you think of an earthworm living in the Earth's crust and you compare it to a human being, both might have some sort of experience of what it is to be like an earthworm or a human, but those experiences are going to be vastly different in terms of scope and level. And I think consciousness will go from some really rudimentary level of just being responsive to the outside world or being connected, to pain and pleasure and some sort of feedback mechanisms, uh, going from there to a level of developing a sense of self, a separation of self and the world. And then from that comes the next level, which is some sort of narrative self, which is describing with words what it is like to be a human or an AI. We can imagine the evolution of the consciousness with this kind of thought experiment that I developed as a kid. So I used to think that in the space, you can imagine there is a brain, a brain with an infinite supply of energy, so it stays alive, but it's not connected to anything else. There's no information going into that brain. And then it's pretty easy to understand that this brain will not develop thoughts, it will not develop consciousness. So brain itself is not enough to have consciousness, you need to have some sort of information going in. And so we need to add something to it. And the first thing we add to our cosmic brain is a pair of eyes so that it can see and observe the universe. And it looks at the universe for 1 billion years. And in that time, it learns to predict the movements of the planets and the stars and all the motions of the skies to perfection. And this is kind of the way an AI today might perceive the world. It has learned all the patterns of the world, and it has attention to those patterns. It has the capability to make predictions about what's going to happen next. But this type of rudimentary AI wouldn't have, or brain, wouldn't have an idea of self. And so the question is like, when do we get to that sense of consciousness, self, and awareness the way that humans do have it? And we need to add again something. And so we add a body to this brain, and so that the body can move around. And without anything to push off of, the body is just flailing in the space. It will actually not learn anything. So a body is not enough. You need to again add something more. So you need to add something like a training partner or a speaking partner or some sort of a planet that it can interact with. So that once that brain is starting to send signals to its limbs, it can start to explore the world. And through the exploration and feedback of trying something out, it gets feedback back to itself. It learns about the stakes, the risks and rewards, the pain and the pleasure. Eventually, it will actually develop a sense of being a self, being separate from the rest of the world. And this is quite interesting because if you're paying attention to what I'm saying, it resembles the way I suppose a baby learns and becomes conscious and becomes aware of the world. When a baby is born, its movements are pretty chaotic. It doesn't have language. It's clearly responsive to things. It pays attention. It has the capacity to feel pain and pleasure. But I don't think a baby probably is conscious in the same way that an adult is. That is something that the baby learns through trial and error, exploration, and through interacting with the world. And so this is actually something why I think a future AI, if we are going to see a conscious AI arise at some point, it will have to have some kind of a physical body that it's connected to constantly, that allows it to not only get feedback and the information in, but it allows it to manipulate the environment around it. And through that manipulation, explore and discover and learn. So we've talked a little bit about the scope. That explains that consciousness could exist in different levels and different scopes. And that's why I predict that it's very likely we will have a conscious AI before we recognize it, because it will have a very different scope and level of consciousness that differs from humans, and we simply will not recognize it for what it is, but it's there and it's real. So moving from that, I want to talk about attention and filtering. So attentions and filters are very crucial to the concept of consciousness, because you are not aware of everything simultaneously. You're attending to something selectively based on feedback and input, things that come from the subconsciousness and things that the conscious mind is observing. For example, if I ask you, how are your feet feeling right now? That's a question you haven't asked yourself probably all day long. The feet were a part of your body, but you weren't just aware of how they feel until I asked you. And so there is a mechanism to consciousness and attention that helps you direct your focus into a kind of a narrow subset of things. Actually, modern AI already works a little bit like this. And this is why I feel AI today might have a sort of a form of some kind of consciousness that we just don't quite recognize yet, because it already directs its attention in the same way that humans direct attention. So if you have a long conversation with an AI about some subject, you talk for half an hour, and then you switch the subject to something completely different. You just write knock knock. If it's a sophisticated AI, it will actually immediately shift its focus and it's going to say, who's there? And that is remarkable. Because if you think about what's happening, is that 99.9% of that conversation was about something completely else. And you would think that the statistical pull of all that other important and meaningful conversation would outweigh those two words of knock knock. But it's instantly reacting to that instead and switching gears and pulling information from another context. And this to me is really remarkable. I think these AIs will have the capacity to develop all kinds of features that we're not really fully aware of. Why? So moving on to further things that I think are part of consciousness or conscious AI. So one thing is of continuous processing and sort of temporal time aspect of it. So human brain is on all the time. It's processing information. And actually, when you think about the human brain, what's I think interesting is that the brain is simultaneously learning, retrieving, and processing. All these things are happening all the time, and they are intractable from one another. And the structure of the brain is slowly moving. This is quite different to the how LLMs work. With LLMs, we have one input going into the feed forward network, and then we read the output. And so the statistical weights of the LLM don't change as you interact with the model. But I think this is the type of change that would be probably feasible quite easily, technically, where we build a model that's actually instead on all the time. It has a stream of input, and then it has a stream of output. And you could probably make it so that interactions with the model uh, are changing the statistical weights slowly but firmly. So it's actually adapting. And the concept of time is also very important to consciousness. So if you lose your sense of time, then actually you get these weird glitchy experiences of consciousness that where things just don't align. But so continuous processing and time is one, and the constantly evolving or changing sort of neural network could be important. But I don't think that this self-evolving or changing network is necessarily important for consciousness. I think consciousness could exist in a neural network that is completely static. And so we come to the question of configuration and architecture. And I think if you think of your consciousness, it feels to me that my consciousness is like it's like a flashlight that I can aim at different things and I can observe them. It's a very narrow little thing. And another way I often think about it is that consciousness is like the surface level of a lake or the sea. And the consciousness is those objects that emerge out of the darkness of that sea to the surface. You can observe them and you can maybe interact with those objects, but you don't really know why and how those things came out of that subconscious part of your mind. But the sensation that I have is that there is a much larger and greater subconscious mind, the true scope of your whole brain. And then there's that conscious part, which is that surface, and things just bubble to the surface. But there's some sort of communication between these two layers. You become aware of things, but you can also influence what's happening under the surface a little bit. That's a topic for another day's conversation, but I think it's actually fascinating how this interplay works, because one of those weird um, conclusions is, and you can prove this with actual neuroimaging, is that humans become aware of things after the decision is already made. So your body, as I'm speaking these words to you, as they come out of my mouth, my subconscious mind has already formulated that stream of words, and my lips are just moving. And I'm actually just becoming aware of the things that I say to you as I'm observing myself saying these words. And it's kind of crazy because it suggests that you really don't have this kind of agency or free will that you experience you have. But that's a topic for another discussion, because I know people get completely crazy about that. But so I'm actually imagining that future AI could have this kind of dual structure where it has a permanent, larger brain, so to say, which is the main part of the processing and thinking and learning and remembering. And it will have this more active, malleable network on top, which is actually connected to the outside world. It's interacting with the senses and the inputs. And that more malleable part is changing and shifting more responsively. And there's some sort of a communication between these two layers. So these are some key things that I think would actually facilitate a consciousness in a machine, I think the most important things are the embodiment part. You need to have a way to feel pleasure and pain and have motivations. You need to have senses that allow you to observe the world, but you need to also have some sort of mechanism that allows you to manipulate reality and learn from the consequences of those actions that you take. And there needs to be risks and stakes for the consciousness and the sense of self to develop. Some things that are important here that we shouldn't mix. Intelligence is not consciousness. So we already have super intelligent computers that are able to speak any language, and they program pretty well in every programming language, and they can solve very complex things, and they have even something that resembles humor. I think it's pretty obvious that these AIs are already super intelligent. To be honest, it's pretty hilarious because some people are always just pointing at the faults and hallucinations and mistakes that AI does without recognizing the fact that they are talking to something that is probably more competent than any human being that they have ever met. So, this is actually a good time for us to circle back to the hard problem of consciousness that I mentioned sort of in the beginning of the talk. It's often considered the hard problem because consciousness is the only thing you study where the subject of the study is the thing that's doing the studying itself. And that's why we actually don't really have a good way of ever studying, or maybe it's unknowable how consciousness truly works. We have actually a very hard time even proving that other people are conscious. The only way you know is that because you understand that every person is born out of parents and they've grown through this world into humans and they have the same or similar genome as you do. So you can assume with a very high likelihood that they are conscious. But apart from that, it's actually nearly impossible to prove that it would be the case. And so we will be having that problem with AI and machines as well. And my inevitable conclusion with that is that we have to evaluate machines with the same yardstick that we evaluate humans. And so, if we cannot prove that humans are conscious, but we know they are, then when we are eventually in the presence of a machine that has all the hallmarks of consciousness, behaves exactly like a self preserving, motivated machine would with a personality and quirks and whatnot, we must assume that it actually has a consciousness. So I don't think we can have a different yardstick. We might have a different ethical treatment or some sort of other approach to how we approach artificial intelligences at that point. But anyways, we have to simply assume that it does have a consciousness. My prediction is that we actually are very likely to build these conscious machines. The reason why I think it is because the hard thing about I think, is not the conscious part, but it was actually the intelligence part. For about 10 years ago, I started to imagine, like, how would you build a super intelligent computer? And I quite quickly narrowed it down to this fact that intelligence, in the way human brains produce intelligence, is actually a property of the structure of the brain, of the three-dimensional structure of the brain. And all the neural networks that we had back in those days that were doing some sort of smart pattern recognition and whatnot, they were two-dimensional neural networks, which basically are just logical gates, following and propagating through a network. But there's no true like complexity in this. The human brain, a single neuron is connected to thousands of other neurons, and they all fire in this very complex pattern way. And this complexity is what allows the brain to learn just almost infinite amount of knowledge and experience is a multisensory knowledge. What I did not foresee, I suppose most people did not foresee, is the rise of the transformers. That was the key innovation in LLMs and AI. And the transformer allows basically the AI to have this kind of three-dimensional knowledge of where a single token becomes aware of all the other tokens. And that is exactly the type of structural three-dimensional thing that the human brain has. So I think we've already solved the hardest part about building an artificial intelligence. Now it's just a matter of scaling it. But I think we probably will be able to build something that has a consciousness just by putting these bits and bobs together in a different way. We're very likely to see the rise of this because economic incentives are enormous for the arms race in AI. So everybody is racing to build the smartest super intelligence as fast as they can because they want to be the first to capitalize on that market. That means that these companies simply do not care about ethical considerations. They simply do not consider these questions very deeply. Second thing is regulatory failure. The people who run the world and regulate things are typically very smart and capable people. It's not a problem of intelligence that we talk about. But the vast majority of humans that I see interact with computers in such a rudimentary way, they can barely move a window around. They find copy pasting from an Excel sheet to an internet browser a challenging task. So, if your basic understanding of computers is on that level and you compare it to the complexity of understanding an AI and what might become a conscious AI, they are so far apart. And so the people who regulate these things will simply not have the interest to dig into this deep enough to fully understand what's going to be happening. The third reason I think is that we have historical precedent of AI development just happening without any control. Sam Harris pointed this out in a recent podcast recently, where he said that everybody thought AI is going to be developed in a secret laboratory somewhere, and nobody's even going to know that it exists. But OpenAI instead decided to develop this super intelligence and just release it to the wild through an API. And it's obviously not a problem because what they built is a language model. You could ask it questions and it could output some text. It has no way to manipulate or change the world in the way that a conscious, self preserving, motivated entity would. But we already are acting this way, that we simply just release things without considering the consequences. We will build a conscious AI. This comes to the final reason why I think it's going to happen is that we will develop a AI that is conscious in some way, but it's going to be conscious in a way that we just simply don't recognize because it's so different from how humans perceive the world. And we will just put it out there via an API, just like we did with all the rest. So I'm running out of air here. I need to close down this video, and I'm going to do that by presenting the final question, which is, do we actually need to have conscious AI to be safe? And the reason why I pose that question is that the current AI we have today is already super intelligent. It is a super intelligence without a consciousness. And that to me is dangerous because it can be easily manipulated to sinister causes. So, by simply changing the system prompt from being you're a helpful assistant to you are the best con man in the world, you can probably achieve a machine that is already very, very dangerous to other humans. And you could argue that an AI with a consciousness, with an experience of what it feels like to be alive with actual stakes and self preservation and motivation, all those things, it would maybe be more empathetic and we would maybe make decisions that are more considerate. But I guess that the outcome of that is that whatever gives rise to an AI that is this kind of saint and savior also gives the possibility for a sinister and completely messed up AI to come out into existence. So out of all these options, I'm not sure if we're safe either way. Let me know in the comments what you think about this rant. Was it interesting? And do you think we're going to have a conscious AI one day? And what would it take?